How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Hey, how's it going? Today in this video, we've got a really fun tutorial. We're going to use artificial intelligence to take recorded audio and automatically transcribe that to text. We're also going to use some audio intelligence to automatically figure out which parts of that audio was positive or negative, so basically sentiment analysis. And then we're also going to add in some entity and topic detection so that we can kind of extract what are the pieces of information that is being talked about in this audio file. Let me give you a quick demo of what we're going to build in this video. All right, so I got a React application here, and you can see it has an audio recorder. So we're going to go ahead and just record a little bit of audio and see what happens. Hey guys, how's it going? If you don't already know me, my name is Marius. I'm very excited to see that my subscriber count is slowly but surely growing. Actually, I think around April 11th, I recently got 10K subscribers. So thank you so much for your support. Unfortunately, I've been very busy with life and work and have not been able to produce as much content lately. But don't worry, I still have a ton of content planned in the coming weeks, so make sure you're subscribed. All right, so that was about 30 seconds of audio. I'm going to go ahead and click upload here. And what it's going to do is it's going to do a little bit of processing, and then it's going to come back with results, and it's going to show those results on the UI. All right, and here's the results. And you can see that it took exactly what I said and turned it into text with fairly high accuracy. There's also some sentiment analysis going on. You can see that we're highlighting based on the sentiment. So anything that is gray is neutral, green is positive, and red is negative, right? So you can see here I'm kind of trying to put out some excitement in the way that I talk so that it shows up as green. And then, you know, this part is a little bit of negative if you read about it, right? Because I'm saying I'm kind of busy, but then it goes back into a positive sentiment as I say that, hey, I'm going to be able to make more content. Now, in addition to that, you'll also see that some words are bolded, and that's actually the entity detection happening. So for example, it's recognizing that my name here, that this word is potentially a person's name. You'll also notice that it noticed April 11th is probably a date, right? So that's entity detection. And then on top of that, we're able to detect, you know, the general topic of this entire thing. So topic detection, it's saying that, oh, this is most likely talking about content production, which exactly that's what it is. It's talking about me making content for my YouTube channel. All right, hope you like that preview. Isn't that pretty cool? It's sort of like creating a baby version of Alexa or Siri, right? Like it's able to just listen to you and figure out what are you talking about. So there's a lot of really interesting use cases for this. Like for example, maybe you have a podcast that you want to turn into a blog post, or maybe you want to create, or maybe you want to generate subtitles for your video. Or perhaps you have a call center and you want to figure out how happy are my customers, right? Like people that are calling in, maybe you record that and then you figure out, you know, what's the sentiment, what are people talking about and stuff like that. There's a lot of really useful use cases for this. Now you might be wondering, how are we achieving this, right? It seems almost magical. Let me introduce you to AssemblyAI, who I'm happy to say is the sponsor of this video, also the first sponsor to the channel. At a high level, what AssemblyAI can do for you is it exposes some APIs that allows you to send them an audio, which could be a file or it could be a URL to something that's already hosted somewhere. And then behind the scenes, they use their large deep neural networks to automatically turn that into text and do a lot of these magical audio intelligence stuff, such as what I just demoed to you with topic detection and sentiment analysis and such. And that's honestly just a few of the features that they offer. If you go to audio intelligence over here on their website, detecting phrases, auto chapters, content moderation, there's a bunch more things here to explore. So if you had a lot of fun making this tutorial with me, you know, make sure to go to their website and check out what else can you do with this product. All right, jumping right into the tutorial, what we're going to do is actually use Create React App to create a new application. And specifically, we're going to use the Chakra UI template. That way we get some out-of-the-box components that we can just use right away. We don't have to worry about making things from scratch. All right, so in the terminal, I'm in my desktop currently. I'm just going to run npx create react app, provide the title of my project, and then make sure to pass in the template at Chakra UI. Now, while that's installing, let's quickly talk about how we're going to send audio to AssemblyAI. Now, one of the things you can do is if you have audio hosted somewhere, you can see that you can just do a post/transcript and provide a URL to wherever that's hosted. However, in our case for this tutorial, we don't have something like that. And really what we want to do is record new audio so that we can test different types of, sentences and stuff like that. Now, luckily, AssemblyAI also allows you to do an upload to their service. That way you don't have to worry about, hosting it somewhere or storing it somewhere. So with all that said, as you saw in my demo earlier, we have a recorder here. And this is actually straight coming from this React Voice Recorder package that I found on NPM. So shout out to the author, Siva Prakash, if I'm saying that correctly. Now you could build this from scratch if you wanted to. It's actually not that hard to make either. But I wanted to keep this tutorial simple. That way you can get up and running quicker and be able to test AssemblyAI much faster. So back in the terminal, my installation for the Create React app is already done. So I'm going to cd into that, and I'm going to go ahead and also install that React Voice Recorder. Now this package is kind of old actually, so it still depends on React 16. So it's going to error out if you try to install this with NPM 7 or 8. So we're going to add the -- legacy peer deps here. That way we don't run into any problems. And then I'm actually going to add axios here because that's what we're going to use to make our API requests. So might as well install it here. All right, dependencies out of the way. Let's take a look at the code. And we're actually going to go right back into our terminal to start the project so we can see what we have here. So run npm start, and you'll see on localhost 3000, it's going to look something like this. So let's do a little bit of cleanup. You see there's a color switcher here. We don't really need that. I mean, you can keep it if you'd like. Let's get rid of this logo, remove the text and the link so that you should just have something that looks like this. And let's also clean up our imports to get rid of those unused things. So right now we just have a blank page. All right, so our first step is to be able to create that audio file, right? So that we can do the upload. So first thing we need to do is integrate that React Voice Recorder that we just installed. So make sure to import that component and then the CSS that comes along with that. And while we're here, I'm actually also going to import use state from React. So first thing is we need a little bit of state for the recorder itself to manage. So we're going to create a use state of audio details, and it needs to be initialized to something like this. We're also going to add state for transcript and is loading. Transcript will be the actual data that we're working with, coming back from assembly. So we're going to be filling this in later, but for now we just need to initialize it to be an object with an empty ID. And then we're going to have loading state. This is what we're going to use to just show a loading sprinter on our UI. So we need to update that as we make our API requests. All right, so with that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and add our recorder within the VStack here. VStack is actually just a flex box that automatically adds spacing in between the items of the children. So let's go ahead and add our recorder here. And these are the required props. You can see that the auto URL comes from that audio detail state that we added. And then it also requires a couple callbacks that we're going to provide for what happens when you hit stop, what happens when you upload, and what happens when you reset. All right, so first let's provide handle audio stop. And all we're going to have in there is actually set audio details data. This data is sort of like the output of the recording, right? It's going to be in the same shape as our state here. All right, and let's also provide handle reset, which really what we want to happen here is we want to reinitialize the audio details back to this. So let's actually extract this to be, let's call this initial state. Let's put this up here. Right, so what we're going to do in a reset, we're going to do set audio details to be a copy of the initial state. And in addition to that, we also want to empty out any information that was previously stored in the transcript, to kind of prepare it for the next recording. So we'll also reset that. And then let's provide handle audio upload. That way it doesn't error out. All right, so now at this point, you should be able to see the recorder on your screen, although it's kind of squished. So we'll wrap that in a box, and we'll just give this bigger width. That way it's not being squished. So let's move that in there. A box in Chakra is really just a div that allows you to do, basically CSS via props, right? So now it should look a little bit better, right? All right, so at this point, assuming that we installed everything correctly, this is actually gonna do a lot of the audio logic for us, right? It's gonna create that file, it's gonna do the recording, and then when you hit this upload button here, it's actually gonna pass in the audio file here as a parameter. So what we're gonna do in handle audio upload is we're gonna do set is loading true, right? Because we kind of need to mark this as we're gonna start uploading and processing this data. We're gonna send it to AssemblyAI. Now the next thing we need to do is to create the ability to send authenticated requests to AssemblyAI via axios. So I'm gonna also add axios here as an import, and then we're gonna create an instance of axios that allows us to set the default base URL, which is this api.assemblyai.com/v2. And the important piece here actually is this API key that we need to provide via environment variables. So I'll show you where you can get that in AssemblyAI. Once you create an account and log in, which is free, by the way, it's free to get started. Your API key when you log in is going to be in this white box here, and make sure to just click to copy that. And actually you can see that on the basic plan, the free plan, you have 3 hours of transcription per month. So that gives you plenty of time to test out this product. Now the way we're going to provide that value to our React application is through an env file. We're going to do env.local, which you can see is automatically get ignored, so it's not going to be accidentally sent to a repo. So we're going to take that key that we used, we'll do this, and then make sure to provide your own API key here. I'll do that, off screen. And then once you do that, make sure to restart your application so that it can be picked up, by this code. All right, so I've added my own API key in there, so I'm going to restart the application. Now I need to be perfectly clear that this is a secret value, right? If you're paying for the product, you don't want that to accidentally be exposed to anybody. So make sure that in production, you actually want to hide this server side. You don't ever want to expose this to your client, right? And we're making a very simple proof of concept here, so I'm not too worried about it. It's really just a tutorial. But again, if you're going to use it in your own stuff, you're going to put it out to production, make sure that's actually hidden. All right, so at this point, we should actually be able to take this assembly API. So we're going to go back into our handle audio upload callback here. And we're just going to use axios to make a post request to /upload. And remember, we're using assembly API here, so it actually has a base URL of this, right? So it's this /upload. And since we're actually doing async and await here, let's make sure to make this async. Now, what's actually inside this upload response is the upload URL that we can then provide to the actual transcript API. So we're going to add another request here after the upload is completed. We're going to forward upload response that upload URL to /transcript. And then this is actually also where you can configure the different features that you want to toggle on or off for your transcription. So we're going to add sentiment analysis true, entity detection true, and IAB categories true. This is going to power some of our audio intelligence features in a little bit here. Now, when this request actually responds back to you, it does not necessarily mean that the processing is done. So what we need to do is actually poll AssemblyAI to ask, hey, is my processing is done? Hey, is my processing is done? And then we keep doing that until it says, yes, your processing is done, and here's your data. So in order to do that, first we need to keep track of what is the ID of our processing here, right? So that's part of the initial response. So we're going to do set transcript. Remember, we have use state for transcript up here. And we're going to fill in that empty ID with the ID that we got from /transcript. All right, so what we want to happen is once there is an ID in our transcript data, we want to trigger an automatic polling to figure out, hey, is my processing is done? So we're going to achieve that via use effect. So make sure to add that to your imports up here. And then just under our state here, I'm going to add some code, and feel free to pause the screen to copy it down if you're trying to follow along. But let me explain it. So basically what we want to happen here is this use effect will automatically trigger whenever is loading changes or the transcript changes, right? So when we actually set that ID, this is going to trigger a rerun of this side effect. And what we're going to do is we're going to set an interval to make a request to /transcript/ID, that ID that we got from the original request. And then we're just going to update the data as it comes back. And as part of this data, the transcript data has a status in it. And what we want is to basically stop the polling once we know that the status is completed. So that's why up here we have if there's an ID and the status is not yet completed and it's loading, we're going to keep polling, right, at an interval of, I think this is 1,000 milliseconds. Otherwise, if at the point that we're able to run this and the status is completed, it's actually just going to set loading to false. That's going to tell our app that, hey, it's done. And then we're going to clear the interval so that it stops polling. Now, this polling behavior kind of is a little bit of a hassle, to be honest, but AssemblyAI does have a WebSocket API, actually, if you want to just have a persistent connection so that you immediately know when the processing is done. You don't even have to poll. However, I believe you have to be a paying customer to use that WebSocket feature. And I wanted to make sure that my tutorial can be followed by anybody, even if you're not yet necessarily paying. So that's the catch. We're going to have to just poll, which really is not too complicated. Anyways, assuming that our code eventually gets to here, right? Like each time it polls, it gets an updated version of the transcript data. And eventually, once the status is completed, that data is actually going to have the text that it kind of took away from your audio. All right, so what we're going to do to just immediately test this out is we're going to add another box in our VStack here. And we're going to do if transcript.text, we know that it came back and it now has information in there, that transcribed text. And then we know that the status is completed. We're just going to render the text. Otherwise, we're going to say it's loading, right? And we're going to improve this to look like the final state that we showed at the beginning of the video. But first, let's just make sure that our uploading and recording is actually even working, right? So back in the UI, it's actually just saying it's loading because we don't have the data yet, right? We haven't done an upload. So let's do a little bit of a quick test here. So I'm actually going to open the network tab here so you can kind of see this, the polling behavior happening, since right now our UI is still pretty basic. So I'm going to record a little bit of audio. Hey, how's it going? Hope you're having a good day. So I'm going to hit stop there, and then I'm going to hit upload. So you can see it calls upload here and then transcript, and then it's going to keep polling AssemblyAI until eventually the data comes back as completed and processed. And eventually it stops. You can see that at some point the response comes back with a status completed, and then it has the text property filled in with the transcription, right? And if you take a look at the older requests here, you'll see that the status here is processing and the text is empty. So eventually it becomes completed, and then once it's completed and we have the text, we can present it on the screen. All right, so at this point, really, we've already established the integration with AssemblyAI. All there's left to do is to make the UI a little bit better so that it can show all those features that we had earlier. All right, so now we can get into the actual fun stuff, right? What I'm gonna do real quick is actually add an avatar here, just for fun. We're gonna add that robot picture that you saw in the beginning. So get avatar from Chakra UI React, and then I'll paste that in here. It's just gonna be an avatar that's 2XL, name AssemblyAI, and then I got this picture from Unsplash. It's just a nice little robot, so it should look like that. And then let's go ahead and actually improve our loader here. So I'm gonna create a new component. I'm just gonna call it status.js. And this is really just going to be a fancier loader for us. So we're going to add is loading in here, and we're going to react to what the current status is. So let me import text and progress from Chakra. All right, so I'm going to add some text in here. And really, this is going to take is loading and just have a little bit better of a message for us. So it's going to say calculating, and then whatever the current status is as we're polling the API, we're going to present that on the screen. And if it doesn't have a status, we're going to assume it's uploading. And also, we're going to assume that if it's not loading, that it hasn't received any audio yet. So we're just going to say give audio. And then finally, we're going to add a nice little progress bar that is going to be size small, and it's going to be green. And then it's just going to do this like little animation while the is loading is true. So you'll see this in action in a little bit, but we're going to replace our loading text here with the status component. And I actually made a mistake. This status should be in src. I accidentally put that in the root. So let's move that in, right? So you should be importing status from locally like this. And then we need to provide is loading as a prop and the status via transcript.status. All right. So right now you should see, if I refresh, give me audio with the loading bar at the bottom. And then we also want to move this transcript text to its own component, because this is where all of the visual stuff that we're going to add in with the highlighting and stuff like that. So to do that, we're going to add a new component in src. We're going to call it result, or result.js. So that's going to need the transcript as a prop. And then we'll also import text from, again, Chakra. And then we can do transcript.text here. So same thing, let's replace this with our new result, pass in transcript. All right, so at this point, your code should look like this. And then the rest of our coding is really going to happen on this result component. So let's go ahead and actually talk about sentiment analysis. So remember that when we made our request to transcript, you saw that we had sentiment analysis true here. So that's how we tell Assembly, hey, please do sentiment analysis on this audio that I'm providing. Now, if we open up their documentation, so if I go to docs here, there's a section here that says audio intelligence if you want to read more in detail. But let's go to sentiment analysis. Just to summarize for you, what really happens is when we get back that transcript data, once the status is completed, if you provided the option to do sentiment analysis true, part of your response is going to include this sentiment analysis results array, which really what that is just, it's an array of the individual segments of your text, right? So it breaks apart your text, and then it'll say, for that segment, here's what I think the sentiment is. So it's either going to be neutral, positive, or negative. We can take advantage of this to rebuild our result to include the sentiment analysis. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a new component. We're going to call this highlighted.js. And similarly, we need a couple of things from Chakra. Let's import box text and tooltip. So what this component is really going to take in is the individual segments of our sentiment analysis results. So it needs to know the text so that it can display it, and it also needs to know the sentiment so that we can color the background, right? So in here as props, we're going to do text and sentiment. And above here, actually, I'm going to create a simple mapping of sentiment to the color that we want for the background, right? So you see like positive is light green, negative is pink, neutral is just gray. Right, so what we're going to do now is turn this into a box, but really, so there's an as prop that you can pass in to change what the underlying element is. I mentioned earlier that box is by default a div, but you can change that to, in our case, let's do a mark, because that's usually what you use when you want to highlight stuff. Now mark by default will highlight your text in yellow, so we're going to use the bg prop to change that to be from our sentiment color here, pass in sentiment, so that, again, if it's positive, it'll be green, and so on. And then finally, we need to output our text. And let's put a little bit of a margin right here. I'm just going to pass in 1. All right, so we're going to take that new highlighted component and actually use it in our result here. So we're going to import highlighted from highlighted. And now remember that instead of us using text, we actually want to use the sentiment analysis result, which is an array of those segments. So we're going to take, for each of the segments, we're going to take that result and pass it into our highlighted. So we're going to pass in text, which is the result.text, and then also sentiment, result.sentiment. All right, let's go ahead and test our application so far with that highlighting in place. So let me record. Man, I'm really happy because the weather is really nice today. However, it kind of sucks that I dropped my wallet and I lost some money. Let's do an upload. Now you can see this uploading behavior so that we don't have to look at the network tab. It will actually just tell us that it's processing Now the uploading does take a little bit of time depending on, your network speed and stuff like that. All right, and here's our results with that highlighting happening in the background, right? That's pretty cool. So we got our second feature, we got the transcription, and now we got sentiment analysis. All right, isn't that really cool? Feel free, if you're following along, take a pause on the video and just do a couple of tests yourself. Honestly, I had a lot of fun building this. You can test out all sorts of things. All right, let's go ahead and actually talk about the next feature, which is entity detection. And what this really is, as you saw with sentiment analysis, it kind of looks at chunks of your text to figure out the sentiment. In this case, it looks at the individual words and determines what is the potential entity behind this. And there's a couple of different types of entities that it can detect. You can see here in the documentation. I'll scroll through this real quick. There's a couple of things that it knows to detect. For example, credit card, numbers, dates, events, email address, language, location, money amount, person age, person name, organization, right? There's a couple of things here. Now, you might be thinking, what's the point of this? Now, in my mind, this is really useful for scenarios where maybe you're trying to create a form that you want the voice to interact with, right? Like maybe the person can't type, so you have to use voice. So, right, you can ask for a person's details, like what's your name, what's your age, and where do you live, and stuff like that. So how this works is, again, notice that we provided earlier entity detection true to our API request, right? Kind of like we have here on /transcript. Now, similar to sentiment analysis, once it comes back as part of that response object, it's going to have an entities array. And you'll see that each entity that comes back is really a portion of the text, that it can be one to many words. And then there's an entity type to determine, what is the thing that got detected, right? So it's from this list over here on the left. All right, so what we're going to do to apply that is, as you saw at the beginning of my video with a demo, what we want to do is kind of turn that detected entity into a bolded text. That way we can visually see which ones got detected. And then we're going to add a tooltip so that when you hover over it, you can see what the type is, the entity type. So in highlighted, we're going to add entities in here, and that's going to come from the greater transcript data, the response data. So it's transcript.entities. And then let's switch over to highlighted. There's now a new entities array in here, right? All right, so what we want to happen here is, so remember in our highlighted, it's already pulling in the subtext of the greater text that we have, right? So imagine if, for example, we had text equals TED conference was great, right? Like imagine this was a positive sentiment. And imagine that in our entities, we have something like this, right? Maybe this is one of the things that got detected, that the TED conference is a type of event. So what we want to do is really split this text into smaller parts so that we can separate, what is a detected entity versus just, the rest of the string. So as an example, we want to break this text down to something like an array that includes TED conference and was great, right? That's the result that we want to get to. And then we need to add a little bit of logic to say, TED conference is one of those entities, so we want to highlight that bold and also wrap that in a tooltip to provide the entity type. So here's how we're going to accomplish this. First, let's create an array of all possible detected entities, like just the text, right? In this case, it'll just be TED conference. Even have a typo here. And then we're going to do the splitting of that text to the individual parts. Now that's actually fairly easy to do with the split method. So we're going to do parts equals text.split, and within split you can actually provide a regular expression. So what we're going to do is we're just going to provide every possible entity text that we have, and it's going to split based on that. So for example, again, kind of like what we have here, if it found TED conference, it's going to split the string right there. So that's going to turn into exactly what we want. So this is going to be parts, right? So I hope that makes sense. So now we need to update our logic here to not just display the full text or the subtext for the sentiment. But now we need to use the even more breaking up text, which is parts, right? So we're going to do for each part, if we know that this part is one of the detected entities, we need to display it differently. So how do we know that? Well, we can just do a very simple find. So if the part is found in the entities, it has that exact matching text, then it must be a matching entity. So we're going to do if matching entity, and what we're going to do in here is display a tooltip and bolded text. So you'll see that I have text here with a bold, and then we'll display the part in here. And then the tooltip itself is going to display that entity type so that when you hover over it, you can imagine that TED conference would be bold, and then when you hover over it, it's going to say that's an event, right? So that's what the tooltip is going to be doing. Now, if it's not a matching entity, there's really no work to do. We just need to return part. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Feel free to pause the screen and copy the code if you're trying to follow along. All right, with that in place, let's do a couple of tests to make sure that it's working as we expect it to. So let's open this up side by side actually, so I can try to say a couple of things from this. So let's hit record. Hello, my name is Bob, and it's currently December 5th. It's almost Christmas, and I know how to speak Korean. I'm currently in Wyoming, and I have $5 in my pocket. And also for a living, I am a software engineer, and I work for Uber, and I'm 37 years old. That's it. Let's do an upload. All right, there we go. So we got our results back. It's fairly, from sentiment analysis, it's fairly neutral, but it does notice that Bob is a person. We got a date. We got an event with Christmas here. Korean, speak Korean, so it knows that's a language. Wyoming as a location. $5 is a money amount. Software engineer is an occupation. Uber is an organization, and 37 is an age, right? So that's really cool. Hopefully you're finding value in this product. I think it's actually really cool. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Again, I could see a lot of value in using this maybe for some kind of form that you need audio to fill it out. I don't know, right? Like if you think about it, when you ask Alexa, for example, to order your stuff, and Alexa's going to ask you like, what do you want to order and when do you want to order, right? This is really sort of the seeds to a feature like that. So that's entity detection. We've got one more feature to cover here before we wrap up, which is topic detection. Here's a list of the potential topics that it can try to figure out through the audio. As you can see, there's 698 potential topics. So there's things like, automotive and pottery, fiction, cookbooks, blues, reggae, right? There's a lot of things in here. And the way to enable this is by providing the IAB_categories to our transcript request, which we already did earlier, if you remember. You just need to make sure to provide that as a true value. And then similar to the other things, it's going to add more data to our response. So you can see that in the response object here, it has IAB categories result, which outputs a status, and then it also outputs a results array. So kind of similar to how the sentiment provides an array of the different subtexts and the potential labels of that subtext. Now we can do that similar to the sentiment analysis. However, what we actually want to use here is summary. You can see that summary is able to look at the entire audio file as a whole to figure out what is being talked about, what are the topics that are being talked about across this entire thing, right? So instead of us looking at this array of results, we're actually just going to look at the summary, which is going to output something that looks like this. So it's got a summary object, and each key is the potential topic, and then the value is the confidence score, right? So the closer it is to 1, the more confident the model is at saying this is the topic that's being discussed in your audio. So as you can see, this also includes low confidence scores. So you want to make sure to filter those out and maybe only pick up the things that are, above 0.6 or something like that. All right, so just like the others, we're going to create a new component in SRC. Let's call this topics.js. And let's also initialize this to be a functional component. Similarly, we're going to take some imports from Chakra UI. First, let's do a heading here of, let's just say topics detected, size medium. And then we actually also want to have the transcript be the prop in here, because that's going to contain the summary. And then let's do a box with a little bit of padding. And then really in here, what we need to do is process the data that's in that summary array. So that's going to be inside transcript.iab categories underscore result that summary. So we want to process each of the things that are in here. So we're going to do object.keys so that we can map through each individual key. And each key really is a potential topic. So we're going to do topic. And then for each topic, we're just going to render a tag. Right, so I just provided a tag here, size medium, with a teal color, variant solid, and make it a little bit rounder with a border radius. And in the topic, let me explain this real quick. You'll see that each of the keys look like this, right? So let's copy one of these examples, right? So a key looks like this, right? Which we don't really want the whole thing. Really, we probably only want the last thing in here. So that's why we're splitting on these chevrons, and then we only want to get the last one, so that's why we're doing pop, right? So the end result of this really is just the last piece. Hopefully that makes sense. Now we also said that we actually only want to get the topics that have high confidence scores of at least 0.6. So we're going to add a filter in the middle here that's going to do, it's basically going to get the value and just make sure that if it's less than 0.6, don't include it in our result. Right, so this is actually very simple to add in. So let's import topics in our result. Right, so import topics from topics, and then we'll just add that down here as part of our result. And that's it. I think this is pretty much all of the code that we need for this tutorial. So, all right, so back in the UI, let's do a couple more tests to just overall test the whole thing that we've built with the three features, right? We're transcribing to text, we're doing sentiment analysis, and then we're doing entity detection and topic detection. So I guess 4 features. All right, so I'm just going to do a couple random test recordings here, see what kind of things it shows up in our topic detection. All right, let me hit record. Recently, I bought new shoes. They're really nice. I'm going to go run a marathon soon. I'm going to go to Boston and run the marathon. Hopefully I do well. And there you go. There's the result. It's mostly positive. It detected that Boston is a location. Things I'm talking about, shoes and footwear, running and jogging, which is, technically correct. Let's do another test. So I'll hit clear. So I recently moved to Portland and I've been hiking a lot. There's a lot of waterfalls over here. And I saw a bear. The bear did not like me. Upload. All right, same thing. It's fairly accurate. It's got my text here. It sees that, potentially the hiking and the moving is probably a positive experience, but that the bear not liking me is a negative. And it did detect that we're talking about potentially outdoor activities and camping. Not really camping, but I can see how, hiking and camping are kind of related. So that makes sense to me. All right, I want to see how well this can handle a tongue twister. She sells seashells by the seashore. It thinks that we're talking about potentially jewelry making and collecting. Would make sense. Seashells. How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Wow. Okay, that's pretty impressive. Honestly, I'm guessing they really taught that model to work with tongue twisters, and it did detect we might be talking about woodworking. What else can we do with this? I finally saved up a bunch of money to buy myself a new car. Perhaps I'll buy a new van and live inside that for a while. All right, pretty reasonable results. Topics detected, minivan, vans. All right, last one. All right, guys, that pretty much wraps up our tutorial here. Hopefully you followed along and had a lot of fun, or perhaps you just watched and enjoyed it anyways. Make sure to leave a thumbs up, a comment, and again, thanks for Assembly AI for sponsoring this video. Definitely had a lot of good experiences working with them. And that's it. I will see you guys on the next video. All right, so there's our results. You can see mostly positive. They actually are able to see Assembly AI themselves as an organization, and the topics detected is artificial intelligence, which exactly that's what it is. All right, anyways, that actually is the end of this video. Try it out, see what kind of things you come up with, what kind of results you get back, and let me know in the comments what you think.